Welcome back to Crafting a Meaningful Life. I know this week you've been crafting your life and making it and creating it to be just the life you want. Not somebody else's life, but the life that was meant for you and is meant for you. And we're going to do that again today. Today I have my dear friend Kirk Chugg with me. And welcome, Kurt, and I'd love to have you be a friend of my guests and friend of all of my listeners. It's so good to have you here.
Thanks, Mary, for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast. I've watched you for years on your podcast and been inspired by what you've done and the people you've had on. So I'm honored to be here today. Thanks.
Well, Kurt and you and I go back a long ways, back to the Corporate Alliance days. So that's probably 15, maybe almost 20 years.
I think probably closer to that 15. Yeah.
Yeah. And you were this sharp dresser, always came into the network meetings looking like, just like sharp as a pin. And I was like, okay, well, I'm glad he can dress so fabulously, but me, I'm just here in my, Nordstrom Rack style.
You've always had great style, Mary. You've always had great style. Don't sell yourself short on that.
But that's how I first got to know you. You owned Haberdash, and you still own Haberdash, really creating and dressing some of the best people in Utah, and at least those that are known for their clothes, and really around the states. I don't know if you're international or not, but I know that you're national with your brand and what you do in creating things.
Yeah, I've got clients in and out of the country, so it's a lot of fun.
It is. And you have set the standard really in Utah of how to dress your own style. And I try and really talk to my women about that. It's not looking like FOMO, what everyone else is looking like, but creating and knowing your own style. Yeah. And you're a master at that.
Well, thank you. That's nice of you to say. I appreciate that. I think it's easy to create your own style. It's, people are so worried about dressing like everybody else. And that's what makes creating your own style so easy is you only have to put a jacket on or wear a snappy color a couple of times and people go, wow, I'm noticing that person more. And, when we sit down and talk to people about who's your audience, what do you want them to see? And how does that match the message that's coming out of your mouth? Those are fun conversations. I'm really good at what I do, and there's some repetitive nature to my business where, I've measured thousands of people, and that part of my job is very routine by now. But creating these plans for people where they can really sit down and say, what do I want people to think of when they see me walk into a room? And how does that match what I'm saying, either from stage or, selling in front of people or selling on Zoom calls or, what I post on social media? All of those things are very fun for me to sit down and really create a brand with people and say, what do you want people to think of when they see you? Because like it or not, we as a society, we really do judge people first before they even open their mouths by how they look, and then when what they say matches how they look, we go, this person knows what they're talking about. So
let's start right there, because I can't even tell you how many people, particularly women, because that's mainly my audience. I'm about 85% women. So stay tuned, 15% men. This is going to be also for you, okay? But that so many women talk to me about their dilemma that they feel inside, that they ask me this question. Mary, if you truly love yourself, which is what you espouse every day of your life, then why the focus on the physical? Why do you put makeup on every morning? Why do you dress? And why do you, when you go to the gym, still wear makeup? And, buy the schwanky workout outfits? I mean, really, does any of that matter if you love yourself? And are you putting out to the world that, well, yeah, I love myself when I look this way? So I've had to answer that question hundreds of times.
So how do
I'm
you
asking, I'm
how,
asking, no, I'm asking you first.
two podcast hosts going at each other. Like, I want to hear your answer, Mary. So I think each one of us has a message that is valuable. And in order for that message to be received in a way that we as a society will open ourselves to hear, we have to be congruent with both how we look and how we sound.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it's the greatest thing, to be honest with you. I think that people that are maybe indigent on the street have some of the best wisdom in the world because they've learned life through a really, really hard lens, right? And most people don't stop and talk or listen to them because of how they look, right?
Out of fear, oftentimes, yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know that it's the best gauge of society of where we can say, I'm only going to listen to you if you look nice. But that's the way it is. And if you want to get your message out to people, you have to look the part of what you're saying. And for the last 15 years, that's been my message of, if you got a mustard stain on your shirt and you're talking to people about anything, they're not listening to what you're saying. They're looking at the mustard stain. And then, subconsciously what we do is we say, he's got a mustard stain on his shirt, or she's got a mustard stain on her shirt, doesn't even know about it. What else doesn't she know about? She doesn't really have things put together, right? There's been psychological studies, even done in the Army, that unless those things align, there's no access to what the person is saying because of that distraction. And our brains can only focus on one thing at a time. And if there's something distracting about the way that you dress, and it can be too far too, right? If you're dressing like a peacock, people are going to be like, I can't pay attention to anything she's saying because she's dressed so outlandishly, or her makeup is too crazy. And so I think that that's where crafting a brand really comes into play of like, what are you saying? Is it kind of something exciting and out there? Let's dress that way. If you're sitting there and you're constantly pitching to boardroom executives and attorneys, you better dress like they think is appropriate, or they're not listening to you. What I've seen recently too is very you never saw me without a tie 10 years ago, right?
Right.
If I show up on a podcast in a tie nowadays, people don't listen to me because they think I'm just going to say something stuffy. So I don't put a tie on for podcasts. So you have to also know your audience. A lot of times when I leave for the day, like today, I will see 6 people by the end of the day today. And each one of them is buying and dressing in a different segment. So one is a wedding party. One is an entrepreneur. One is a blue collar guy that just wants a suit, a really nice suit. And I have to take with me in my car when I go to their homes and their offices, different outfits. So when I walk in, I can't walk into a boardroom dressed like I'm dressed on the podcast today, because they won't listen to my expert opinion when I say that looks good. And they look at me and say, well, you're not even wearing a jacket today. How do I know where my sleeves are supposed to hit? So I will get dressed in the morning so on purpose that I can switch outfits and use the pants for a suit and throw it on with a sport coat so that those people are looking at me in something similar to what they just bought. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense, Kirk. You can't even imagine, because I think back when I was working and I would look through my day of who I was meeting with, and maybe wear the same black basic pant, but then a different top, different jewelry, some super flashy. And sometimes I would even take 2 purses, 2 bags. Mm-hmm. I might take my Louis Vuitton to go to one meeting where I knew that the client was going to show up in her Chanel and Gucci, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we wanted to be on the same level. And then I would actually switch it out to maybe some lower vinyl bag that was fun, but not necessarily saying, you can only work with me if you had the money for a designer bag.
Right.
And so it really is about what I wanted to put, the thing that drove that for me. And I think this is the difference between people who are living the life of FOMO, that fear of what someone else is thinking, or, and the way I dressed and what I think the way you dress is that I want the person that I'm talking to feel comfortable.
Exactly.
And so if I'm dressed the way that they are dressed and they feel like I know style and I know fashion and all my ideas are not coming from Provo, Utah, that perhaps I've traveled the world and I know a little bit more about the food in Barcelona. Okay.
Yeah.
Or
the food in Barcelona.
Right. Okay. So you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
Or is this someone who's going to have a wedding in their backyard and they want to make sure that that they're not too far, they don't view me too far above them, to be able to relate to what that they want and understand. And so it wasn't about dressing to impress them. It was dressing to have their comfort level be comfortable with me.
Right. And I think that just enters into the realm of self-awareness, right? Being self-aware and situationally aware of where you are and who you're with is one of the most polite things that you can do.
Right.
I teach my kids constantly to be aware of their situation and analyze things before they say something or do something, so that they're acting in a way that's appropriate for the situation. And I think for this part of our conversation about dress, I think that's what dressing appropriately is just being aware of your situation in a polite and kind way so that you make other people feel comfortable. Yeah. So I think we've had a casualization of everything post-COVID.
Right.
People got real used to doing Zoom calls and podcasts in their dress shirts and their boxers.
Exactly.
And so they had a hard time going back to dressing up. So I have pivoted and adapted, and I'm doing casual vests and bomber jackets and five pocket jeans and things like that, where they can still feel comfortable, but they're not getting dressed like, back in the day, if you were a man in the corporate world, you got dressed in a suit at least 5 times a week.
Right.
So you needed 5 great suits, and guys just don't need 5 great suits anymore. So that's why there's so few of me around.
36 ties, right? And so many ties. You could make it's only you can have 5 great suits as long as you have that 10 times that many shirts and ties that you can mix and match and put together. Correct. And all sorts of things. The one thing that you asked me about, what do I say to women who ask me this question? And typically, what I tell them is an experience that I had at age 50 at 284 pounds and was reflecting the fears that I had inside of me. I rejected myself before I ever let anybody reject me. And so that's what I put out to the world was, don't approach me because I don't want to show myself. Mm-hmm. But as I began to heal that, and as I began to heal those fears inside of me that I wasn't enough, and I was able to turn the lens inside and truly learn to love who I am, the outward appearance of my body began to shift without my even being aware of it. Mm. I lost my first 20 pounds and was like, that was just my body getting in touch with who I am. And now that I have lost 144 pounds, you'll see me in some pretty snazzy outfits with a slit up the side, and those aren't things that I actually set out and said, I want to make sure I have a body that I can wear a slit up the side.
Yeah.
I set out and said, I want to dress reflecting me, of the vivacious, lively, fun. Let's be out there and show ourselves. And I don't mind if you look at me because I'm looking at you. I know you're going to love what you see. And I love what I see from you. And I think that more than anything else drives our style, drives how we dress. And to dress authentically for me is the best thing I know how to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an outward expression of what's inside of you.
Yeah. That's right for me. So after your clothing company, or along with, you're still doing your heavy into your Haberdash clothing, you started to do something different. And I kind of like to spend the rest of our time talking about that piece. You work, how much of your clientele are men? 90, 95?
98%.
98% of your clientele are men.
Yeah.
Or their wives or partners buying for their men.
That's correct. I dress a lot of men. I work with a lot of women.
Yeah.
So I work with executive assistants for a lot of my clients. I work with wives. I work with brides. I work with brides' mothers. So I communicate with women on a regular basis. I dress the men they love.
Oh, I love that. Communicate with women and dress the men they love. I love that. Is that your slogan? You should have that stamped all over your
No,
books.
I just came up with that right now, Mary.
Oh my gosh, write it down because it is fabulous. And if I were to land onto your website and see that, I would just no doubt this guy's for me because he gets me. Yeah. All right. So after having done Haberdash for a long time and meeting with so many men and seeing so much of their personalities and where their lives are as human beings and seeing some of the problems in our society, you decided to do something yourself to make a difference.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Well, back to corporate alliance days, I was building a business and I was gone most of the day. I had 4 kids. They were all young. And I would get home and there would be hardly any time for me to spend time with them, like teaching, downloading, anything. I was wasted. I would go to every breakfast and every lunch at Corporate Alliance while trying to sell in between and create relationships. Right. And it was great. It's how I built my business.
As many of us did.
A wonderful experience. But I didn't leave much time for me at night. Mm-hmm. And our kids would go to bed at like 7:00. So if I got 15 minutes with them, I was lucky. And my kids would ask me what I did, for my day when I was away from them. And I would refer to all of the people that I met with as gentlemen. And, I dressed a gentleman today. I went to lunch with another gentleman. And one of my twin boys at the age of 5 looked up at me and he said, "Dad, what's a gentleman?" And I didn't really know what to say because I think the definition of a gentleman varies between people. And it also is a nuanced question that could, at the end of my podcast, I ask every guest what they think it means to be a gentleman. And I have recorded 130 podcasts and every single answer is different.
Yes.
And
love that.
So I thought to myself that night, I'm not really sure how to answer his question. However, it's my job as his dad to teach him what it means to be a gentleman. And in the same vein, I want to teach my daughters what to look for in their future husbands and the men that they surround themselves with, because I hope that those would be mindful gentlemen as well. So we started just this little curriculum. I'm looking to see if I might have one right here, actually. So this is my son.
Very
John's.
Nice marketing technique, how you leaned over so everyone could see those gazillion fabulous jackets behind you.
Those are my deliveries today. So this is a little leather-bound book that was made by a friend that you know.
Yes,
Rustico,
love Isaac. Yeah.
Isaac Childs. And we started to create this little curriculum. And I don't know if you can see this, but I wanted to teach my sons what a gentleman was, one item at a time. So, for example, this was 11/11/2013, and that week we spoke about a gentleman can say he is sorry. And So we spent the whole week talking about why it's important that when you make a mistake, you own up to it, and that you can apologize, and that doesn't make you less of a man, that makes you more of a man. And
Absolutely.
and then I would write them a little letter over here on this side of the book, and then we would go do something, or practice what we had learned. So we wouldn't move on to the next thing until we had done something to cement in our minds that we had learned it. So this became the Gentleman Project at my house. And as I started, so that's the backstory of where it came from, was just me trying to connect with my kids and download some of the things that I hoped that they would learn and take with them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And I started to use the time at Corporate Alliance and in the appointments with my friends and my clients to talk to them about, what are you doing right now to connect with your kids? Like, what's working for you? And I would get a couple different answers. I would either get a really good idea of someone that would say, I go on Sunday walks with my kids, and my kids just expect it. And that's when they open up to me. And if they've got a problem at school or with their friends, that's when they know they can talk to me because they have my undivided attention. Super simple idea.
But consistent idea.
But consistent. And, but they say, but I've never told anybody that I do that. Why not? Like, that's a great idea that anybody could just say,
yeah,
I'm going to walk down the street or around the block with my kids every Sunday night. And I would tell the simple story that I just told you guys about teaching my sons how to be gentlemen. And I had people that started to ask for these books. So Isaac made me boxes of these books. And on the front, it just says, "Things my father taught me, a gentleman's guide." And so we had these custom books made, and I started to give them away. Some people were like, "Let me buy them." So I just sold it to them for cost. And they started to do this. And coming back to some of these Corporate Alliance events, they were giving me feedback like, "Hey, I'm at home doing this with my kids, and there's something magical about this word gentleman. My boys want to learn how to be gentlemen, and I have been able to connect with my kids in a way I never have before. So thank you. This is amazing. You need to tell more people about this." So at a certain stage, I feel like I talked about 90% about the Gentleman Project at Corporate Alliance, and people just happened to know that I made clothes as well. And that was kind of my brand, I guess. It was like the Gentleman Project / Haberdasher. And when I started to realize that men were not talking about these ideas, because the other response that I would get would be a man who would say, "I'm not connecting with my kids, and it's what keeps me up at night. I lay in bed at night, and I'm teaching my kids nothing. I have no time for them. They're just getting my leftovers, and it bugs me every day, and I don't know what to do about it." And some of them, I mean, we shared tears at a lot of these tables. And so there, most of the time, and you know how these tables used to go, right? Everybody had 8 minutes. And so at some point I would say, "What are you doing to connect with your kids?" And we'd go around the table real quick. And then it just became an emotional conversation, men and women. And most of the time when my 8 minutes was up, the next person would say, "I'm ceding my time to this conversation because this is what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about selling voice over IP or swag or whatever it was that they were selling that day." They were like, "This is the topic that I want to talk about." So a lot of times we would spend nearly an hour just like round tabling this question of, how do we connect better with our kids? What's an idea you've had? What's something that you've seen work, or what hasn't worked for you? And that became the Gentleman Project. We became a 501c3 in 2015. And we're doing events. I leave for Mexico tomorrow with my boys, and we're going to go build a school with the Gentleman Project down in Chiapas, Mexico.
I love that.
So that's our first international event. We've done So Corey Moore is the CEO at Big D Construction.
Yeah, love
and
Corey.
You've
What a
known
great
Corey
guy.
for a long,
Yeah,
long time.
What a beautiful heart he has.
He does. It's a giver's heart. And during COVID, we started the Gentleman Project podcast because Corey was one of those guys that he heard through Terry Klug. She introduced me she introduced the Gentleman Project to Corey, and Corey called me and he said, "What is the Gentleman Project? Why have you never told me about it?" And I was like, "This is just something I'm doing with my kids at home." And so it changed the culture in his family. And so ever since, he has been on Team Gentleman Project and Team Kirk. And we started the podcast during COVID, and we're still going. And between my network and his network, we've had some amazing people on the podcast. Wow. So and that's what we talk about, is how to connect.
I love all of that. 2 questions came up for me. I hope I have time. Let me look. We're going to take time to talk about both of them.
Okay.
So first of all, I think that, a lot like the word gentleman has a lot of magic within it. And for men to be able to claim that word and that title, that sense of being a gentleman. But I would think that there were a number of gentlemen, and are a number of gentlemen, that come with the question, well, I want to be a gentleman, but what the heck is it? Like, how do you define a gentleman?
Well, you get to ask me the question that I ask everybody at the end of my podcast, I guess. And Corey and I have answered this podcast. We've asked each other. So in my personal belief system, I think that a gentleman is someone who is outwardly focused and self-aware of both his environment and the people around him. And because he is outwardly focused, he's selfless, he's humble, he's giving, he's powerful, and he's strong because he knows the situation that he's in, and he protects. So I think that he also looks out for those. What I think a gentleman is contained in this book. Every one of these is what I think a gentleman is. I think a gentleman can say he's sorry. I think a gentleman does hard things without complaining about it. I think a gentleman respects women in a way that he puts them on a pedestal because of who and what they are, and what they do for him in his life. Because I think a lot of us underestimate the power and influence that women have in our lives, and they deserve respect and honor in our lives. I was taught that from a young age. So all of those things, I think, are encapsulated in a way that I look for somebody in my life that I can say, this is somebody who I want to be like. And I think those are all Christ-like attributes.
And I love that, Kirk. That's such a beautiful definition of it. And I was sitting here doing the checklist. You've just described my husband, John. And it's interesting to be at 67 and find a gentleman to be a partner with in my life. Yeah. Because truly, a gentleman is someone that you can partner with. You don't have to lead. They don't lead you. A gentleman is someone that you walk beside. Yeah, I love that.
I like that. I like your definition too, Mary. Isn't it interesting if you ask 100 different people, you get 100 different answers to that question.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of maybe what they've seen in their life, examples that they have, that they look to. Sometimes it's a father or a grandfather or a coach or a mentor, that they say, this is somebody that I want to be like. And it's interesting to see that there's such a diverse answer on the other side of that question. But I think that's what's magical about it,
Yeah. And he stood the test of time so far. I've been with John 3.5 years, and he is more a gentleman now than I ever thought he was to start with. And so
that's a great surprise.
A gentleman stands the test of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And
all right, so go ahead.
You had another question. I just wanted to say real quick, I don't like the way the word is used. I don't like the way the word gentleman is used. It's used to refer to any man in the news, in reporting, and when people say,
Okay.
it doesn't matter what that man did, he's referred to as a gentleman. I don't like that because I think gentleman is more of a title. You have to earn it.
I love that. Yeah, when they could say the gentleman approached her across the street and,
Assaulted her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of a gentleman is that?
Right.
So it's not what you're talking about, clearly. And when you use the word, the energy around it, Kirk, is so clear what you mean.
Good.
Yeah.
And the other way it's used is, to go to a gentleman's club is a place that I don't think a gentleman goes.
Yeah. Okay. There's that too.
So, I think that when people talk about the Gentleman Project, sometimes they say, "Oh, you have that gentleman's club," and then everybody's eyes kind of light up, like, "No, it's not."
In Utah?
I would love to reclaim. I would love to reclaim the use and meaning of that word for what it really means.
I will help you with that. Okay. I will stand with you on that word. And when I hear that word, I will say that word with you of what gentlemen do.
Good.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay,
Jane.
so my last question that we'll have time for is, this reminded me of one time. I do a lot of public speaking, as you know, and but most of the time my audience is women. I have a lot of time also when it's mixed, men and women. One time I went and I had all men. I didn't know it before I arrived, or I might have changed my talk just a little bit in my PowerPoint, but I just kind of rolled with it and went with it. And about 10 minutes in, I could look out in the audience of these 300 men, and there was kind of this blank stare on their face, like, huh? What, why are we here? Why am I here? And, so about another 5 minutes went by, and there was a guy in, I think maybe the second row, if I kind of remember, was on the left-hand side, and he kind of started doing this nodding thing. And eyebrows raised and like, okay, I think I kind of get this. And so I was so thrilled to see any sort of recognition or acknowledgement. I actually called them out and I said, "So you down there in the second row are the only one in the whole room that doesn't seem lost."
That's what a good public speaker would do.
I said, "So tell me what it is that's the aha moment for you." And he said, this is classic. He goes, "I think I get it. I think this is what my wife feels." And I just laughed out loud and I said, "Oh, your wife feels fear. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm so glad that you've recognized these fears in your wife, but what about you?" And he said, well, he was very good with me. Talked back and forth. He said, "You're talking about fear of going to the gym. I spent my life at the gym. You're talking about fears of climbing Kilimanjaro. You're talking about fears of being able to keep up with your children on a hike, and fears of what people thought about you when you walked into a room because of your weight. I've never had any of those problems." And I said, "I don't doubt that you haven't had any of those problems. But the fact that you have felt fear, I also have no doubt." And the whole room now is dead silent because I'm talking to one person. And I said, "Have you ever felt fear of being passed up of a job, at promotion at work?" And he kind of laughed and threw his head back and he said, "Well, that's not the same thing that you're talking about." And I said, "It is. It's fear." I said, "Have you ever worried about not being a good dad?" And then he got real serious. And he said, "All the time. It keeps me up at night."
Yeah.
Because I'm in the corporate world. Everyone in this room knows what it's like to feel that. I go, "That is fear. That is the same fear that I had. It's the fear of not being enough."
Yeah.
If you were enough, you wouldn't ever be passed over for anything that was right for you.
Yeah.
If you were enough and you were worthy, you would be the very best father that you could be.
Yeah.
And so that fear I see driving men the same way that it drives women, even though it manifests itself in so many different ways than what we experience it. It's the same base thing.
Yeah.
So as I pose that question to you, Kirk. How do you address that with your gentlemen? How do you help them walk through that?
I think a lot of it starts with community. That which is, Carl Rogers said, that which is most personal is most universal.
Yep.
And I don't think we give ourselves enough license to have those roundtable discussions, to admit that we don't have it figured out. The most important thing we could do is not what we're doing corporately. It's what we're doing at home. And when we have to admit that we don't know what we're doing, or that we are learning, which none of us have ever parented a kid today until we woke up this morning.
Right.
Right. And that can be adult children. I've got one leg in and one leg out of that. We just moved my oldest out last weekend. And so I've got an adult kid and I've got 3 kids at home still. And I just told her, thank you for your grace, because I've never done this before and I'm going to make mistakes. And so thanks for being with me on this. As I learn, as you're going to have a whole lot of life lessons in the next short while, living on your own. I'm also learning as a dad, and your mom's learning as herself. And so I think giving ourselves grace, but also going to a community. That might be one person. That might be your best friend. That might be a group of guys that get together. We have gentleman project groups that meet at the country club, and they golf, and then over lunch they have a topic, and that topic is, hey, how's that going with your son who was getting into trouble with the law? We talked about that last time. So like they take notes, they talk about challenges that were brought up last month. They follow up with each other with love of, you said you were going to do this. Did it happen? And we learn from each other, and then we give ourselves this license to say, we don't have this figured out, but man, we're trying, right? And there is power behind that. When you don't feel like this gentleman in your audience felt that he had this fear of not being a good dad, that was what this whole thing was about. I was worried my kids were growing up without my influence, and when they got to the end of their time with me, they wouldn't remember anything that I had to say or anything that had been taught to me. I hadn't taken the time to pass any of these things to them. And that was terrifying, because if you don't change what's happening, you will always get the same result. And I thought, I've got to change something, or they're going to grow up without my influence. And that's my most important job, not building Haberdasher. This was supporting the family. And, you've heard the tropes, right? Like, well, I'm not there because I'm supporting the family. And you have to. At some point, you have to spend time away. You're trading time for dollars, right? But if you're trading all your time for all the dollars in the world and you leave nothing for anyone in your life that you love, there's not enough dollars in the world to make that worth it. So I think creating that, times and seasons and a little bit of that balance where you can say, I've got boundaries with my work and I've got boundaries with family, and they're both healthy, and I do both of them really well. That's when you can feel happy and create that life that you feel like is fulfilling, and that your legacy going forward will be passed on, whether they internalize it or not. I don't know, but you've done your job, right? You've
I
tried
love that, Kirk.
in a concerted way and I know your boys, and you've done a fantastic job with your boys. Both of them, Ryan and Caleb, that I know, they are wonderful humans, and you've done a fantastic job raising them as boys and into men that are just killing it in life right now. I'm so happy for you, and I'm happy for them.
That word legacy is very much a part of the title of my podcast, which is Crafting a Meaningful Life, that you end up with a legacy that you want. Mm-hmm. And it's not something that just happens to come to you. I think it's something that you focus on and that you remember and you craft your life around that legacy. And at my retirement party, I've been retired now 6 years. Next month, I'm 71. Wow. That's incredible to me that I've been retired 6 years. And I said at my retirement party that I wanted my legacy to be that when people spoke about me, they would simply say one thing: Mary loved me. And whether that is my mom loved me, or my grandma loved me, or my best friend loved me, or I only met her on her podcast, but I could tell she loved me. If I have that, I have everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And money can't buy it either. So.
No. Thank heavens, or the wrong people would have it.
The wrong people would have it.
Oh, Kirk, I've loved having you on today.
I've loved having you on too.
Just the depth of the man that I absolutely admire. I have liked you from the beginning. I've loved you later on. I admire you now, and just feel so blessed and happy to have a man such as you, a gentleman, setting the standard, living the life, showing the path, lighting the way for others.
Thanks, Mary. I really appreciate that. It's very kind of you to say.
Crafting a Meaningful Life.